All right, Cap, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. My name is George Hedrick, and I started on the job June 30th of 1975. I had all but given up any hope of ever getting a job in the fire service because I'm a Lancaster County native, and to work in the city of Lancaster, you had to be a resident at that time. And in 1974, Harrisburg had a TV commercial where they were advertising for firefighters.
They had TVs back then?
Yep, they had TVs. They were kind of crude. They were still in wooden boxes, and the picture was round. A friend of mine from Mount Joy, we were both in the fire company down there, said we ought to go up and apply for that. So we came up and put in our applications. One thing led to another. Excuse me. I ended up getting selected to take the test, and my buddy didn't. I took the test and I found out that out of a large group of people, I was first on the list. Then I really got encouraged, and I couldn't wait to get hired, but that was kind of slow in coming. So what I would do is every Friday afternoon at about 2 o'clock, I would call City Hall and talk to Mr. Straub, who was the public safety director. And finally, after about a year of Fridays, I called his office one afternoon, and his secretary said, "George, Mr. Straub's been waiting for you to call. I think he has good news." And Mr. Straub got on the phone and said, "How would you like to start June 30th with the new class?" And I said that would be just fine. So that was my embarking on the career.
How many people got hired with you, Cap?
5. There were 5 of us total. It was myself, Dave Halseal, Jimmy Baumgardner, Dave Swigert, and Steve Mervine. There were supposed Mervine. Steve, back during the reign of Tim Doutrick, I believe, somewhere in there, there was a residency, or maybe it was Steve Reed's first term. No, it was before that. If you moved, you had to move to the city.
Okay.
And Steve was in a position where he had to move and resigned and went to work at 3 Mile Island, where he became chief of security. Steve was a good fireman. We used to call him B-85 Mac Mervadine because he was a fan of the Mac fire engines. That was our group. On opening day, I had met Dave Halseal in 1970. He came to Mount Joy with Carl Marzoff. They were Carl was trying to sell us a Mac. I had just gotten out of the Navy, and Dave was just going into the Navy. And during the test, during the written exam, I bumped into him again. And one of the last things I said to him on the way out the door is, "I'll see you on the job." And we both laughed about it. But when I came in to start on the 30th of June, there was Dave. And we both laughed again because here we were seeing each other on the job. As I found out, I was first, Dave was second, and I think Jimmy was third. Dave selected badge 82 because at the time, Report from Engine Company 82 was the biggest book on the market. And when the badges were handed out, Dave selected 82. I picked number 5 because it was a single digit and it was easy to remember, and I like 5s anyway. So
They let you pick your own numbers?
Yeah, Bob later said these are the numbers that are available, and we went by seniority rank, which was your test score at that time. So I got to pick first, and I selected number 5. Recruit training, our training officer was John Brindle, and the thin man was, he was an institution to say the very least. John was one of those kind of guys that he leaves a mark behind. It's too bad he's gone, but John was a wonderful training officer, very relaxed, very casual. We went through our evolutions with John and John Rao.
Who was the chief at the time, Cap?
The chief at the time was Chet Henry. Assistant chief was Jim Elliker. And Chet, we never saw Chet on a training ground until we did ground ladders. I'm trying to think, I believe it was the first week of August that we did our ground ladders. It was near the end of our training evolutions. We worked ground ladders at the farm show all week long. And by Friday, the guys were pretty well ground down because we were using ladder one, and ladder one had a set of wood sticks on it. So on our last day, we performed our evolutions for Chief Henry, one of which was do a church raise with a 55-foot banger up and over. And when we buttoned everything up, Chet decided that we should go for a run on Riverfront Park with him. Chet was a big time runner. And he decided that we should have a little jog with him and talk. So we started up a riverfront from the old waterworks, and Dave and I were kind of hanging back. We both smoked at that time. And we got up near the monument and basically said, screw this, I don't feel like running anymore. So we dropped out of the pack and hid behind the fireman's monument. Dave opened up the pack and we sat there and had one and watched the boys jogging up the riverfront with Chief Henry. They went up and turned around and started back down, and we hid around the back of the monument, and when they went by, we came back out and joined the mob again. So whereas they ran about a mile, Halcyon and I ran about 2 blocks. And we were looking at angry stares from our 3 compatriots who followed him up the river. But
He never caught you?
No. He didn't even know we were missing.
Nice.
Jimmy Bumgarner wanted to stay down here. He commuted to Lewistown every day. And the only way he was going to get to talk to the chief about staying down here was to stay with him going up the river. So that was really to our advantage, because Jim and Chet were talking the whole time, making arrangements for him to stay here at Station 11 overnight during the week. And his attention was on Jim, and he had no clue that we were missing from the crowd. So yeah, we ran up to the monument and back from the monument, and everybody else ran practically up to Riley Street from the looks of it.
Yeah.
They were not happy about that.
Right.
That was one of the standouts in our training class.
What for assignments with the 5 of you? I mean, how did they deviate? The 75, that we were 4 shifts then?
No, we were 3 platoon.
Still 3.
56-hour work week. They went basically by what shift was short. Bummy and I were assigned to B platoon with Chief Safranik and Chief Bonays. Chief Safranik was the battalion chief, and Mike Bonays was the duty chief. At that time, being the only 2 officers on the platoons, we had no captains or lieutenants. Dave went to C platoon, partly because he knew a lot of the guys on C Trick. Davey Swigert went to A platoon because the guys at the squad asked for him, I believe. And Steve, I believe, went to C platoon as well. Yep, he went to C Trick also. So we were assigned to the squad. Most everybody started out at the squad at 16th, or at Station 16 at 21st and State, because the squad went on everything. And there was a chief's buggy in there. He also went in everything. I turned out on August 23rd for my first on-the-street shift. It was a night shift. Walked into the squad. Chief Bonays said, "Do you know where the Allison is?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You go over there because we don't have enough beds here." And I pulled up back of the Allison, got my stuff out of the car, started walking in the back door. Chief Safranik was sitting there in the captain's chair. And he said, well, Dutchman, I hear you like the tiller, that you're pretty good at it. I said, oh yeah, I like to do that. He said, good. You're on the back end of the ladder truck. At that time, Tower 1 was out of service, and Ladder 2 was in its place. And my first night in the fire department was spent tillering Ladder 2, which was a 25-year seniority job to keep. It was a real rush for me, and I got to follow a good guy. Dick Roberts had to come back. He was the front end man. They told me on the way in the door, you got to keep an eye on him. He drives fast, and he doesn't care about his tillerman. But he took me aside, and he said, don't worry, Dutchman, I'll take care of you. I got the name.
Where did the Dutchman come from?
Jack Snell, badge number 1.
Badge 1.
Badge 1. People around here, they found out I was from Lancaster County. I was the first Lancaster County person to ever come on the job, as far as I know. And if you were from Lancaster County, you were an Amishman or a Dutchman.
Dutch, yeah.
And Jack Snell gave me that name. When I met I was being taken around by one of the guys here on the job, and he said, come on, we'll go meet Jack Snell, badge number 1. And I went upstairs in the Allison and walked up front in the bedroom, and there lay Jack in his boxer shorts with the air conditioner on, watching a baseball game. And he reached up, never got out of bed, just put his hand up like that. I shook hands with him. He said, you must be the Dutchman. I'm pleased to meet you. I'm Jack Snell, badge number 1. First in your heart and first on your scorecard. Yeah. J. Wellington Wimpy. I worked at the Allison with Barry Buskey, Kurt Quigley, Jack, Ken McCann Sr., Jimmy Bender and Howard Hand, and George Safranik was our battalion chief. I was assigned to that house, but as usually happens, low man on a totem pole or low men on a pole, you bounce from house to house. So I very rarely spent a long time there, but that was my first assignment.
You a station.
Oh yeah, they assigned you a station.
Okay.
And at the end of 6 months, you had to post a bid for a job. Interesting thing about that, at that time you could, I'm not sure what the contract says now, but you could move anybody anywhere you wanted to for 59 days.
Hasn't changed.
Okay. Well, at that time, there were 2 guys working at the squad that wanted to go to Station 10 because the Riley Hose was the busiest house in the city other than the squad. The thing about the Riley Hose was, in 75, that's where the fires were. So you got there first. And there were 2 guys that wanted to work up there.
Uptown was burning in 75.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And you still get an occasional brick or bottle. But these guys wanted to work up there, and then they didn't want to work there anymore. They wanted to come back home again. So the first guy moved out of the squad was Jimmy Bumgarner. He was sent up to the Riley, and it was also known as the penalty box, because that's where bad people were supposed to go. And there were a lot of rumors about the guys at the Riley. Not so much.
And the other chief ran out of the Riley too.
Not at that time. He ran out of the Allison. He only moved up to the Riley later on, a couple of years later, right before the roof collapsed.
Okay, so in 75, it was still 1 chief out of the Allison, and
The battalion chief was at the Allison, and the duty chief was at the squad.
the duty chief was at the squad.
Right, at 16. When they closed up 16 and we're over at 11, the duty chief came to Station 10.
Okay.
But then when the other guy came back to the squad, I got moved to Station 10. And I was told that, oh, this guy's, he's a tyrant, and the other one's a Bible thumper, and the other one's not any good. But when I walked in the door, I found out it was a whole different world. The old guy, Davy Himmelwright, Ike, was about 62 years old and approaching the end of his career. Dick Ryder was one of the engine men. Ike was a truck man, and Dick Rogers was the other truck man. Dick was reborn, found the Lord, and stopped drinking. As I said, Ike was getting to the end of his career, and Dick Ryder was supposed to be an angry, bigoted bullhead, and I found out when I got there such was not the case. That these guys worked together, looked out for each other, and we were welcomed into the house, Jimmy and I, like we'd been there forever. We were basically told, this is what we like to do, this is how we like to work. You might have heard things about us, don't believe it. And there was a little turmoil over the bidding and the moving for 59 days and what Chief Bones had done. And it caused a bidding war in the department where everybody in the department had to rebid.
Everybody in the whole department?
Everybody in the entire department had to rebid.
Oh, man, that was a mess.
So I bid Station 10, and so did Bummy. And we were asked...
You changed your bids.
Oh, yeah. We bid up there, and we were asked, well, why did you bid up there? And I told the guy that asked me, because I found a home at the Riley. Those guys are great to work with. They're really super. So I was up there probably 6 or 8 months and was on my Kelly days. The home phone rang, I answered it, it was Dick Ryder. And I started squawking at him, what are you calling me at home for? Why are you pestering me? He said, I got sad news for you. I said, what happened? And he told me that Davy Himmelwright was killed on Saturday in a car accident. Badge number 81. The week prior to that, Davy and I were working on the truck together. Went down for fuel. And he said, you know, you and Bummy are pretty good guys. I hope when you're as old as I am, that some young kids come along and take care of you the way you guys look out for me. And on the way back from fuel, Dave had me driving the truck. He said, stop by City Hall. I think I want to put my papers in. And he went upstairs and started the procedure to retire. And 2 days later, he was gone. That was the first brother that I lost on the job. And he still has a warm spot in my heart. If you go up to the Academy in Lewistown today, there's an aluminum Senator helmet up there, HFD 81. It's Davies. Somebody saw that it got up there, and it's one of the things in their historic display at the Fire Academy.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. That would pretty much account for probably my first year on the job.
It was a busy first year.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There's a lot more. 30 years. I never thought I would do anything for 30 years. But it came and went so fast. There are so many memories, so many people. I bounced around. Under the Kelly rotation, you worked 6 tours and then had 1 off. So I was one of those kind of guys that was a circuit rider. And so was Jimmy Baumgartner. We'd work a tour driving engine 7, and then bounce over and drive tower 2, and then ride tower 2, and then go drive engine 13, maybe ride 13, tiller ladder 1, that kind of thing. And the 6th tour you were off. You spent a couple of tours at your bid job, but mostly we carried clothes and food in the car.
You got around.
Oh yeah, we got around. I remember one time that I walked into Station 10, which was my assignment for the day, and I was told when I hit the door, don't bother, go down and tiller ladder 1. So, big smile on my face, I'm going to be the Royal Helmsman today, okay. I get down to Station 2, walked in the back door, and who meets me but ladder 1's tillerman. I don't know why they sent you down here, Dutchman. Frankie Greenwald. Frankie said, I'm here, everybody's here. So I called headquarters and said, hey, they don't need a tillerman on ladder 1, Frankie's here. Okay, just stay there until we get back to you. They called me back in a couple of minutes and said, get down, drive engine 6. So I pack up, get down to Paxton, walk into Station 6, engine 6 has a driver. I called him and said, engine 6 has a driver. Ride the ambulance. All right. So I ride the ambulance. And we had a fire later in the morning, and Bob Jenkins was injured. And at that time, he was working on Tower 1 at Station 12. Bob got sent to the ER and then sent home, and I got sent to the Allison firehouse. The upshot is, in 4 days, I worked at every house in the city except Engine 8. And in 1 day, I worked basically at Station 10, Station 2, Station 6, and Station 12, all in the morning. I worked on the job 10 years before I ever worked at 8. I never...
10 years?
10 years.
You never worked, you never got assigned to the squad at all?
Never got assigned to the squad, or at that time
Well, it was
Engine 8. I was never assigned at Engine 8 until I was promoted to lieutenant. That was the first time I ever worked at Engine 8.
What was there reasoning behind it? Was it like...
No, it was just the luck of the draw. My number never came up when they needed somebody at 8. But I worked at every other house that was active in the city with that one exception. Yeah. I always thought that was a worthy little story. You know?
That's strange. Yeah. Especially to get floated around so much, and even in 1 day. But you didn't work at a particular station for 10 years.
Yep. The only time I ever spent in there in 10 years was to visit.
Probably wants to be off at the squad.
Yeah, it wasn't the squad then.
Yeah. Oh, let me think.
What, bouncing around all the stations,
Yeah.
Cap, what was your favorite station, and which one was your least favorite, and why?
I don't know why, but I think Engine 13 was my least favorite for a while. And there was never any special reason for it. It was just kind of a pain in the neck to get to at certain times of the day and stuff like that. It was a good house to work at. And the volunteers that rode up, they were good kids. They took care of you. My favorite house was Station 10, because the guys I worked with there were really a lot of fun. 13, a lot of times you were by yourself.
Yeah.
During the day, you were primarily on your own.
Single engine house.
Yep, single engine house. A lot of guys didn't like to work over at Station 11, the old Shamrock house, because that was always a one-man house. I kind of liked it over there because one of the guys left a BB gun over there, and you could shoot pigeons and stuff on the roof of the Curzonade press. You'd throw a handful of bread out there, torn up in pieces, wait for the pigeons to land, and then pick them off the air gun. That was a lot of fun. And I didn't mind working over at that house by myself for some reason. I enjoyed all the houses, and I enjoyed all the guys that I've worked with. There were some real characters in there. Let me see. Well, the boys at the Allison, Kurt Quigley, Snell, of course, Barry Buskey. And out at the squad, you had Froggy Parthmore and Ronnie Reed, Edgar Foltz, Herbie Rodenhaber, Jimmy Segabart. What can you say about Jimmy? I mean, there was a one-of-a-kind guy. And Bummy, of course. It's you never got a history from him, did you?
No.
Jimmy was a good little guy, and a couple of times during our first year, there were some bad feelings with a couple of the fellows in the department that did training, and I kind of fell in being the man in the middle until Bummy set me wise. Jim was the kind of a guy, it's too bad you didn't get his history, because he was a very dedicated firefighter, very good at what he did.
Box 1301 North 6th Street, the Lake Tower, Special Burbank
Of course.
Calder. A firearm class 1.
Of course.
Squatty Wagon 3 Towers 1 and 2, 1740.
And he was a hell of a good cook, too.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Yep, Jimmy was a good cook.
I tell you what, if you're a good cook, that could pave your way alone. I mean, you could be a pretty big
Absolutely.
guy.
Absolutely.
If you're a good cook, that'll get you some distance.
Yeah, Bummy was the only guy the only guy I knew that could scramble an egg inside the shell.
Yep. Shaky. His hands, he had a terrible tremor, but when he picked up a cup of coffee, he was as steady as a rock.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. His sweetheart. Good guy. Good guy. Worked at 10, and when Station 1 was built, about the same time we went over to the 4-platoon system, I left.
Around 1980.
Yep. 1980. I think I've seen at least one fatal or one body for every one of the 30 years that I served on the job.
Go Ivory.
But in about 1980, when Station 1 was opened,
It's Arrow.
I was holding the bid driver job on B platoon on engine 7.
Yeah.
And brilliant, beautiful October day, Saturday. There was an
Squad.
alarm struck for the 1600 block of Hunter Street.
Good address.
Tower
Yep. Reported
2.
house fire.
1301 North 6th, the Lake Towers. Came from limited access. Gonna be Zone 1 General Fire Alarm. Utilize opposite.
Reported house fire, probable entrapment. And I walked out in the apron up at Station 1 and looked out toward the hill and told the guys, saddle up, we're going. You could see the header. The ambulance was already on the way out the door. Safranik took it to the second alarm almost immediately. George was not the kind of a guy, nor was Mike Bones, to just pull the trigger. Those two guys tended to make you earn your keep a little bit before they'd go to a greater alarm. And I was due on the second alarm with the engine. I was by myself, bailed out the door, and when I got on the scene, I beached the rig in a vacant lot, went up to the front porch and said to George, what do you want me to do? He said, the guys from the squad are upstairs looking. There's 2 kids in there. They're upstairs looking for them. And the living room on the first floor was starting to light up pretty good again. So I grabbed an 1.5 inches off of engine 8, took it in the front door, and started working my way back to where the bulk of the fire was. And George said, back up, I got a mask for you. I'd gone in without one to try and knock the fire down. So I shut the line down, backed out on my hands and knees, strapped the mask on, and started back in. And when I reached down to pick up the nozzle the smoke had started to lift. I hollered back to George, I got him. Tell the guys I got him. What happened was there were 5 kids in the house. 3 teenagers were on the second floor, and there were a 4-year-old, 4 or 5-year-old, 7, 8-year-old downstairs. And what happened was the 2 kids downstairs were apparently playing with a lighter or matches and got a sofa burning. And the 3 kids upstairs had no clue that the house was on fire until the smoke started to go up the steps. They ran out the house, and 2 blocks down to one kid's mom and dad and the other one's aunt and uncle, and reported the fire from there. And said that they couldn't find the other 2 kids. So that was the situation that we had on arrival. Nobody knew where the 2 kids, the 2 smaller kids were. They just knew that they were probably in the house yet. And as it turned out, they were behind the sofa and apparently got the sofa burning and were trapped back there, couldn't get out. But today, I can see those 2 kids as clearly now as if I were there. One little hand, the other little hand. And the flesh was completely gone. Once the fire was knocked down, the coroner was called. The chief of the department at that time allowed the news media people access to that living room to videotape that scene, which really upset me because it was, to me, that's not something that you do. And one of the reporters came in and they videotaped what they wanted to, and she turned to me and said, "What's that terrible smell?" And I said to her, "Young lady, it's the smell of those 2 children. And you will never forget it after this." To this day, I cannot go near a lamb chop. To me, it's lamb chops. But she wanted to know what that terrible smell was. And basically, it was the smell of death, and I really didn't think she should be in there. One other thing that really struck me about that fire was when I pulled up with that engine, there were people in the neighborhood washing their cars, doing things in the yard, like the house was not on fire. I mean, they were just going about their business. We got a telephone call from kids that ran 2 blocks, but nobody walked 100 feet to strike a box. Box was transmitted from headquarters. Who cares? You know, those were 2 things about that fire that really stood out in my mind. That was one of the most tragic fires as far as I'm concerned. There have been others, but that one I will never ever forget. I mean, just for some reason that burned into my memory. Yeah. Went on, got promoted to lieutenant in 1985, and Chief Conkle called me and told me that I have good news and bad news. I said, "What's that, Chief?" He said, "The good news is we're going to promote you to lieutenant. Bad news is you're going to be the training officer." Nobody wanted that job for some reason. But I said, "Okay. When do I start?" "Well, we got a new class coming in on Monday, so you start then." He called me on a Friday. And I came in Monday and had a new recruit class, 5 people. Colleen Kearns, Dunkelberger, Charlie Fields, Tim Strasbaugh, Carlos Garcia, and Tim Sevison were my first recruit class. It was before the Hack Academy, so I was like John Brindle. I was out there teaching them by myself, and with the aid of the guys on shift, Jim Bumgardner and Herb Berger. Not during that class, but the next one were promoted to acting lieutenants. The first one I was pretty much on my own hook, and I thought a lot about John and what he did and how he handled it, and basically did it the same way. Back in those days, when you came out of your recruit training and got assigned to a platoon, you didn't have, we didn't have the apprenticeship program, so it was like when I came out, you could be assigned a driver's job or whatever.
Yeah,
whatever came up.
You had a lot of stuff to cover with those
Oh, yeah.
guys.
Whatever was open, you did it. Wasn't long after that, we had the fire at TRW. And
Big fire.
big fire. I ended up here because I was training officer, and then Tower 2, the Sutphen, was brand new. I was one of the few people on the job that had experience with the operation of the truck. And I had heard about this fire from one of the volunteers in Mount Joy that worked up here. He called me and said, "Man, you ought to see this garage fire in back of the bus terminal." I said, "What garage?" He said, "That big garage on the other side of the railroad tracks." I said, "You dumbass, that's not a garage, that's a TRW plant." So I called the radio room, and Skip Esworthy said, "Where in the hell are you? We need that truck over at the fire." I told him I'm on my way up. I got here, and the truck was gone, so I called the radio room and said, "The truck's gone. What do you want me to do?" And Skippy said, "I'll call you back in a couple of minutes." He called back and said, "Chief Conkle said you're in charge of the city. If there's something up there that has lights and a siren on it, you got the rest of the city. He's busy at the fire." "Okay, what do you want me to do?" He said, "If anybody comes into the firehouses, put them to work." Which is basically what I did. I was using the shop truck because it had red lights and a siren on it. I came out here and assigned guys to be pilots for the incoming volunteer companies and stuff. But later on in the evening, I got down to the fire itself. One of the first people I ran into was Colleen Kearns Dunkelberger now, who was assigned to drive engine 2 that night. The old engine 2, the B model Mac. Colleen was a little pint size, and engine 2 had no power steering. She's sitting down by the gate with the rig, looking kind of glum. And I said, "What's the matter, kid?" She said, "I think I'm in big trouble." I said, "Why? What happened?" Chief Kuntz, I believe Chief Kuntz is pretty mad at me. And at that time, Larry was the officer in charge of A platoon who had the fire. So I said to her, "What happened, kid?" She said, "Well, I was up at the other end of the plant, tied onto a hydrant, and had a deluge gun working up there. He ordered me off the hydrant, and I tried to tell him. He ordered me to shut down and get out of there. And I tried to tell him that I had guys working lines, and he yelled at me on the radio and told me, "I said right now, do it now." Well, Larry Kuntz was the kind of a guy, if he said do it now, he did it now. She decides, okay, I'll show him. She yells to the guys, "Let's go." Got him on the rig. Never shut the hydrant. Well, she did shut the hydrant down. Shut the hydrant down, fired her up. Down the street she comes, dragging torn hose lines and a deluge gun behind her. I said, "No, you're not in trouble. He'll find that kind of amusing that you actually did what he told you to do." And as it turned out, he did. It brings me to another story. Years ago, when I was working at the squad, I ended up being a battalion chief's driver a lot, or a duty chief driver.
That was probably a good job, right?
Oh, yeah, it was. Originally, I didn't really want the job. Boney had it for Tommy O'Keefe, who was a floater. 2 stories.
Well, since you're talking about BCs, I wanted to ask, how was Safranik? He was your first boss when you got hired, right?
That's what I called him, the boss. He got a new dress cap, sitting out the squad. He was working over at the squad, got a new dress cap, and he put it on. Didn't fit him to his satisfaction. And he threw it over to me. I was on the other side of the desk. He threw it over. He said, try that hat on. So I put it on. Felt real good. I said, what? This is a nice hat. It fits me to a T. He said, keep it. You'll be a chief someday. George, we had a few fuzzy areas at the start. He picked me one day for a crap detail, middle of summer. A guy's freezer had shut down, and he was away for about a month. And the neighbor who was supposed to be watching the house discovered the day before they were coming home that the freezer had shut down, and everything in it was rotted. George needed somebody to empty this freezer out and get it out of the house, because the guy was a friend of Chet Henry's that called it in. So I was the low man on a squad totem pole that day, and he told me, get your breathing apparatus. We got a job. Went over and emptied the freezer out, moved it out in the porch, hosed everything down. I didn't stink. And the man who called it in insisted that we take $20. And Safranik said, no, we can't accept any gratuities. And this man purely insisted that we take $20. So George takes the $20, we jump in the car, and he said, I don't know about you, but I could use a cold one. And we went to beer distributors and spent that $20 on a case of cold beer. Went up in Reservoir Park by the band shell and sat there and watched down on Station 16 for about an hour in the afternoon before quitting time, having a couple of nice cold beers. After that, there were no more rough edges between George and I. We got along very well, and he was almost like daddy. Right. One night up at Station 10, I lost my father to lung cancer in 1979. I was working day shift when he passed away. My family called. Safranik was in the house when they called me, and he knew the situation. So when I got off the phone, he said, go on, go be with your family. I said, well, I'll wait until somebody gets here to relieve me on the engine. He said, do you think I've been a battalion chief all my life? Get out of here. I know how to drive that thing if it has to go anywhere. And he basically tossed me out of the house. 6 months later, George was a night owl. He'd come around the house strange hours of the day. About 12:30, 1:45 in the morning, he'd come in and said, put a pot of coffee on. I made the coffee, and he said, what do you know about lung cancer? I said, well, other than my pop, that's about it. He said, well, I got it. And I wasn't quite ready for that, because it was like I just lost Dad. Now I'm going to lose a guy that I look at like a dad. And we were in Station 1 when George passed away. He worked up until the very last when he couldn't work anymore. He always had this expression, it's not a mixed company kind of thing, but he'd look at you out of the corner of his mouth, he'd say, boy, I could use a 6-pack and a job. So, George was kind of a guy that could do a crossword puzzle in about 3 seconds in ink, and then he'd go to the crypto quote, and another 5 seconds later he'd be throwing the paper away with all the puzzles done. And he was home sick in his final battle with his cancer. We got a get well card that was like a book, and it was all monkeys and stuff like that doing different things. And we had captions on all the monkeys and different guys' names and stuff from the platoon. And in the back, we made a crypto quote. We took his favorite expression and turned it into a crypto quote. So when he got the card, his wife Barb showed it to him, and she gets to the back page and said, "Oh, look, they made you a crypto quote. You want me to work it out for you?" And she said, George took one look at it and said, "Don't bother, I already know what it says," and told her. Oh, yeah. He was a real sweetheart. Never said much, but when he talked, you listened. I think the only time I ever saw him even close to excited, we had a fire behind Station 16, and when it got discovered, it was out the windows and through the roof. Nobody saw it because the shades were pulled at the firehouse, and everybody that went by figured can't be anything. The fire truck's still on station. It came in by box, 20th and North. The guy that hit the box used his cane to do it because he couldn't get close enough to pull it, and he could barely get the box open, and he hit it with his walking stick and tripped the box. But when George came out of the Allison firehouse, he said on the radio, "Chief Florida headquarters, just give me the threes, let's get it over with." And that was it. That was about as excited as I can ever remember that man getting. He was a good guy to work for. They called him Batman, and they called Mike Bonet's Robin, because that's kind of how the personalities were. Yeah. Yep. Now I lost track of my other stories.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you can get back on track. Well, we have the audience here.
Oh, yeah.
The
Yeah.
one and only Lieutenant Willis Skinner.
The audience is...
And we were waiting to record this story. You have a story.
I do. Let me say for the record that Will Skinner always honored me by being a hard worker, a good friend, somebody that I really admire, and was always proud to serve with. But back in the day, before he came on the fire department, Will liked to play with matches. Working at the squad, we got an alarm for a structure fire, 29th Street, Will? 25th Street, I stand corrected. Basement fire. And we get over there and knock the fire down in the basement. And Safranik is in there trying to look for the cause and doing his investigation. We're cleaning up our gear and getting back to the squad. We head back to the station. And Safranik comes back and said about the kid over there said that the light was sparking in the basement and that's what caused the fire. I think he was playing with matches. Within an hour, we're back at the same address. The basement's on fire again. And this time, Safranik figures it out. It really was the lights. But Ronnie Reed and I were sitting in the jump seat of the squad. Little kids sitting on the porch, snotting and bawling. Safranik comes over and looks at the kid, looks at Reed and me, and said, I really did think it was the kid playing with matches, but he wasn't lying. I feel really bad about it. It's too late. He already got his ass beat. And Ronnie and I looked at the boy and lost it, laughed at him. And 20 or so years later, in the kitchen at Station 1. We're getting a new recruit class. And they're coming to Station 1 before they go to the hack. Everybody gets introduced, and this one guy says, "Do you remember me, Captain?" I said, "I'm sorry, but I don't." He said, "I'm the kid on 25th Street that got his ass beat." And suddenly, here he is.
This guy.
And I love him like my own son. What a great guy.
You got your wish. You got him in the movie with you.
Good. And now one day, Will, when it's your turn to do this, you'll see what you look like today with the other old man. Yep. Let's see. Good Lord. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to talk.
Any good stories that we need to document, Cap? Things between the guys, pranks played on each other, and I know you got a Rolodex of these stories. But I remember one that I remember was we got a brand new TV in the station here, and somebody stole it. Do you know that story? They had brought a brand new color TV in, and I guess the old one was taken out to the dumpster. Somebody swapped them in the middle of the night, or
No, that I'm not very well aware of. But I do remember over at 8, there was a box that kept striking. And somebody noticed about the third time, I wasn't working there at the house, but somebody noticed about the third time that the TV moved from the lounge bunk room into the hallway, into the engine room. And as it turned out, there were some kids hitting the box. If I'm not mistaken, it might have been 13th and Howard. The kids would hit the box, and the other half of the team was up by the station. When they rolled out the door, before the door went down, they were in trying to steal TV. I never did get it the whole way out of the engine.
A little further.
Oh yeah. They go back and move the TV as far as they could get it before the rig started back. And they kept striking the box trying to get the TV out the door, but never accomplished it. I enjoyed fireworks
I was just going to say, I was going to bring up fireworks.
and explosions. It all started with a guy named Howard Hand, who I worked with at the Allison, Hallie being a Civil War reenactor. He owned a brace of cannons. He had a little half-inch smoothbore. He had a 69 caliber Napoleon field piece. And when we got assigned to work together at Station 10, it was always black powder, cannonballs, and tacos. We ate a lot of tacos, Hallie and I. But when the battalion chief was out of the house, we used to strap his 69 caliber Napoleon to a 2x12 so it wouldn't flip over, and fire shots out the side door of the Riley with it. We used to fill ping pong balls with gunpowder and put party poppers in the middle of them and then seal it up. And we'd tie them to locker doors, cabinet doors, refrigerator doors, so that when the door got opened, it wouldn't be so much an explosion, but a big flash and a cloud of smoke from black powder. When we could get M80s, we blew up refrigerators in the basement, shaving cream cans. John Blessing said one July about, boy, wouldn't it be neat if it snowed now? It'd be nice to have some snow. Hallie and I took a feather pillow, tied 3 M80s together with a length of cannon fuse and some scotch tape, took it up on the fire escape, slammed the pillow down on top of the fuse, and the explosion replicated the snowstorm in July. It also cracked some windows in the factory building next door, but that was just one of those unfortunate things. Excuse me a second, if you don't mind. Curiosity. Can't take that one. I had a green smoke grenade that I obtained from someplace, military. Brought that up because I knew Hallie was going to be working with me, and we're sitting in the kitchen at the Riley. I pulled the pin, tossed it out the back door. The main problem being the wind was coming out of the west, and all the smoke came back into the firehouse and chased us out the front. So while we're outside waiting for the house to clear enough to get back in, the city phone started to ring. And Hallie and I ran along the side of the station to one of the old stable windows where you could reach in. Hallie boosted me up. I reached in the window and grabbed the city phone. Said, "Station 10, Hedrick speaking." And George Parthmore was in the radio room, and he said, "I'm not sure what to do here. I don't know whether to send you guys or what, but I got to report a heavy green smoke in the area up there." I said, "George, don't send anybody. It's us, and we can't get in the house." "What do you mean?" I said, "I had a green smoke grenade and threw it out back, and all the smoke's in the firehouse. Now we can't get in to get at the rigs. You just can't get in the building. It's, terrible." Okay. So that was the last we heard of that, but it never happened again. We stuck a fuse in the Napoleon, had it on the kitchen table, and Chief Rydell came down the steps. When he turned around, Hallie said, "Hey, Captain Fred, watch this." Lit the fuse. He had about an inch of fuse in the top of the gun, and I was behind the lockers with the paper bag inflated. And when the fuse burned down, I broke the bag. And we looked out, and Chief Rydell was on the floor digging in. He thought he was shot. He used to leave the house because he knew what we were up to.
Yeah.
You guys are going to get me in trouble.
It's easier to get the hell away from
Yeah. There was a brick sidewalk beside the house. We used to line the cracks in the brick sidewalk with gunpowder and then light it from one end and watch it burn down to the other. We'd shoot 2-inch firecrackers out of the 1/2-inch cannon because if you tape the fuse down along the side of it and put it in backwards, the exploding gunpowder would light the fuse. And then you'd get 2 booms for the price of one.
Right.
The cannon and the firecracker would fly out the front door and explode in the middle of 4th Street. Well, the chief was sitting eating lunch or dinner, and we fired one out. The cannon got bumped, and the firecracker hit the outside rear wheel of Tower 2 and bounced back into the engine room and landed between his feet before it went off. So we weren't allowed to do that anymore. We did have a lot of fun with explosives. And that carried over. When I got promoted to captain, I had 5 boxes of fireworks in the bedroom closet at Station 1. Captain Berger was back there smoking a cigar one day in a no smoking area. But when I came in, he was all over me about, "You got enough gunpowder back here to blow that corner off the house." My reply was, "If you weren't back here smoking cigars, we wouldn't have to worry about it." We did have fun with fireworks. One of my philosophies in life was, when you work, you work, and when you play, you play. And I always enjoyed the firehouse antics, which there were plenty of practical jokes and games and things like that. I always like to try to keep things light and have a good time. Sometimes it got into the field where it would be easier to ask forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Right.
We did get away with a lot, and I hope the guys that I worked with enjoyed the time that we spent together.
Yeah, one of my first trainings out of the fire academy was airbag training. Remember that incident?
Yes, I do. Out here, this is a chapter in one of Dave Halseal's books. We were getting new airbags.
Might be copyrighted. No, I'm just joking.
The department was looking at new airbags, or looking at airbags for heavy lifting. And the salesman was here at Station 2 to demo the bags. And a whole platoon was here. They were lifting what, the hazmat, or was it one of the old wagons?
The hazmat.
Hazmat. They were starting to lift them. And the platoon was arrayed in a semicircle around the back of the truck. The chiefs were actually squatted down on the floor with the salesman at the rear of the rig, and it's coming up in the air. I just finished a 16-ounce chocolate milk in a pasteboard carton. And like every school kid, for some reason, it just struck me that it would be really funny to break this carton. So I set it on the floor, and the guys across from me see what I'm about to do. They're trying to keep from laughing. And the guys in front of me have their backs to me and don't have a clue. I lined up on that carton, stomped on it, and it was the best milk carton explosion I ever had in my entire life. To me, it sounded like a 12-gauge shotgun going off. The guys across from me lost it. They're screaming. Morty Warner was the absolute worst because he watched it from start to finish and was going absolutely bananas. Everybody that had their back to me jumped 3 feet in the air. The chiefs and the salesman slid out from under the back of the rig. And when it was all said and done, I looked at the salesman and said, "You don't have a lot of faith in your product, do you?" Chief Barry was so mad, I think he wanted me to die right where I stood. I think he really would have liked to sent me home,
Yeah.
but didn't. Yeah, that was a beauty. That has to be my best practical joke ever.
That was a good one.
Yep, and I'm glad Halsey made it a legend. I'm really pleased. I got mentioned one way or another in all of his books. The other one, well, there was the pants and shoes in the men's room. The guy that wouldn't come out, the two guys that wouldn't come out of the stalls. That was my shoes and pants and Dave's shoes and pants that were in there all night long. Looked like two guys sitting on the hoppers. And Donnie Gardner had to go, but nobody would answer him. So I went in, got a quarter, opened the door, and took my pants and shoes, said, "There you go." That and the Tasty Cakes with Chief Newsom, the petrified Tasty Cakes, which he had the excuse for and bit into, and they disintegrated. I think the best part of the fire department is what you dream up in the kitchen and what you talk about. If firehouses didn't have kitchens, they'd be really dull places. To me, all the good memories come from the kitchen, or things that you did to the guys in the bunk room, short sheeting them,
Right.
putting barbell plates in their pillowcases, listening to their head clank when they went to sleep that night. Yeah, 30 years.
I know one story I do want you to tell Cap, because there isn't, I know, I called you talking about trying to get the Gamewell system hooked up for the Allison, bells and the electric shop catching fire and everything. And obviously not many people, knows the stories or anything else, but that's definitely something. And I can't remember the individual's name you said. I think he was Electric 1.
Gene Mahaffey. He was Electric 2.
Okay.
Gene Mahaffey. Yeah, I guess the statute of limitations is probably over. I wanted
Well, we won't release this for a couple more years either.
I wanted a Gamewell house gong for my collection. And I suspected there were some available. So I got in touch with Gene Mahaffey, who was Electric 2, and he said, "Yep, I can get you one." And it was all settled. I made the arrangements for payment, and he came up one lunchtime and had this gong in the electric truck, put it in my car, covered it up with a turnout coat. I took it home, and I came into work the next morning, and the boys are out of the house. Well, they'd just come back to the house. Stank to high heaven of burnt material, and they're washing piles of hose. And I said to Ronnie Johnston, "What'd you guys have?" And he said, "Oh, didn't you hear about it? The electrical shop burnt to the ground last night." And the first thought in my mind is, oh my God. They found out, or they're going to find out about that gong, and Mahaffey burnt the shop down to cover it. I tried to call him at home, couldn't get him. I tried for almost a week to get a hold of Gene, and I couldn't get a hold of him. And every day I'm expecting 2 girls with a search warrant to come to the house. Finally, I get a hold of him and said, "Mahaffey, what happened at the electrical shop? You didn't do that, did you?" He said, "Hell no. I didn't have anything to do with it. So-and-so left a 300-watt soldering iron plugged in, and it was on the bench. They found it. They traced it to there." I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Absolutely. I couldn't do that." But for a week, I was afraid I'm going to end up in the county slammer next to Mahaffey because he burnt the electrical shop down to cover a hot gong. And like I said, I believe the statute of limitations is over on that because it was back in '77. That's how I obtained my house gong.
And didn't, at least the stories I heard, all the bells or any parts that were left over, they just were taken up to the dump?
We were not allowed to go through it. Dave Buskey asked if we could go down and salvage stuff. They refused to let us do that. It was all taken to the incinerator, and it's all somewhere in the bottom of Mount Ashmore. But there were game well items that were probably salvageable out of that fire. Very little came out of that was salvaged. The bulk of it went to scrap, which was, to me, a terrible waste of historical stuff.
Yeah.
Yep. I always thought that building would make a good firehouse. The old water.
Where was it exactly?
Front and right below Foster, where the
water plant is?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep. The building's still standing. They salvaged it. The walls were intact. The only thing, the interior and roof were gone, but the building itself is still intact and it's still in use. I always thought that would make a good house for some reason or another. It's higher, it's above the majority of the floodplain, and it's a big building. At one time there was a standpipe there where that castle-like turret is. There was a huge standpipe there. The water system in Harrisburg was designed by the same man that designed the Chicago water system. His last name was Birkenbein. He designed the Mount Joy water system, Harrisburg, but he also installed the Chicago water system prior to the Great Fire. That was one of his claims to fame, was the Chicago water system. And at one time in Station 11, there was a Birkenbein fire plug. He
had his own hydrant.
It wasn't a hydrant. It was a plug. Basically, the main had a T in it with a pipe that came up and fitting or two on it and a valve on the top. But there was this big cast iron box that sat down over the top of it, and a lid would lift up to allow access to the valve, and the pipes stuck out through openings in the plug. In the wintertime, they would stuff those with horse manure.
To keep them from freezing.
Absolutely. The horse manure heats up.
All right.
And it kept them from freezing.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So it wasn't a hydrant as we know it today.
Right.
It was just a tap in the pipe with a cast iron box over it with a lift-up lid. If somebody took that Birkenbein plug out of the shamrock, you could witness the drag marks. It apparently was more than 3 people because the thing was huge. It was 3.5 feet tall and probably weighed on the order, I'm going to say 300 pounds. It was monstrously big and heavy. And you could see where it was dragged across the hardwood floor and bounced down the stairs. Yeah, I went over there one day and it was gone. Some guys think that Frank Ficomio might have gotten it.
Okay.
Because he was a member over there, and he had some of the stuff from the old Shamrock firehouse. Wherever it is, I hope it's found a good home.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it must have been a real project to get her out of there.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see. Probably should think about winding this down. 2004. I got promoted to captain in 1995 when Tommy O'Keefe retired. Tommy called me up, and the only 2 words I heard on the phone was, "You're welcome," click. And I got to notice that I was going to be interviewed for captain, along with Al Kump, Jimmy Bender. And I was lucky enough that my number came up. I got promoted. Spent the next 10 years as captain of D platoon at Station 1, where I encountered guys like Will, yourself. 2004, I was having some difficulty swallowing. Came in and had breakfast one Saturday and couldn't swallow the pancakes. So I called Chief Bangert and said I'd like to get down to the ER and having a lot of trouble swallowing. And it was during Hanukkah. They called a doctor in, Dr. Siegelbaum, and he did an EGD, and when I woke up, he told me, "I'm not going to pull any punches with you. It's the ugliest tumor I've ever seen." And he told me that I was now a victim of esophageal cancer. When that settled in, I wasn't aware how serious it was, and that all the statistics said that I should be dead within a year. But my brothers and sisters on the department, my good friends, all lied to me and told me that this is easy, it's a piece of cake, you'll be fine. When they put the feeding tube in, I decided I better start taking sick days because it was not going to be easy to work with 3 feet of hose in your intestines and a foot of it hanging out the front of you. So I went on sick days, went through the surgery, rode my sick days and vacation days out until Chief Conkle called me and said, "You're running out of days there, buddy. What do you want to do?" I kept telling my oncologist and Dr. Siegelbaum and everybody, when I get back to 150 pounds, I'm going back to work. And the late Dr. Alexander, my oncologist, said, "Can you retire?" I said, "Oh, I could have retired a couple years ago, but I love what I do." He said, "You should think about retiring because you'll probably never see 150 pounds again." I said, "Yeah, I will, yeah." And as it turned out, he was right. I was wrong. And I decided I better retire. So on June 30th of 2005, came back to work for one day. Went up to Station 1 and Al Kumpf came in, who was now battalion chief, 1D platoon, and said, "Put your stuff in the buggy, old man. The chief told me not to let you kill yourself on the last day." So I rode with Big Al on my last day. And I was honored at lunch by the family that I love so much, with cake and the fixings and traveling vagabonds that came to say goodbye. One of the most unusual things, the last run I went on was by the railroad tracks. It was a grass fire. And Al came over to me after it was knocked down. Billy Russo was holding up the rat and said, "We have a dead body here." But Al came over and said, "What's wrong with you? You got a look on your face." And I said, "Al, if everything holds until shift change, 30 years ago, my first fire was right there. 20 feet from where my first call was my last call. Same thing, a grass fire by the railroad." He said, "How do you think it got started?" And I said, "I think Safranik threw a butt down from heaven and did this for me." When 4 o'clock came, we got the radio check to Captain 1. Everybody asking for that radio check. I made my final statement and told the men how very proud I was to have served with them and how much I loved them all and still do. And walked out the door carrying my gear just the way I carried it in when I started 30 years before. In my entire 30 years in this department, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 people, I cannot say that there is anybody that I dislike. I love each of you as though you were my own family. And some a lot more than others. They say when you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And my answer to that is, I never worked a day in my life. My worst day up here, I always knew that I was surrounded by people that I could depend on. I could place my life in their hands. They could place theirs in mine. And that meant more to me than all the gold in Fort Knox, all the whiskey in Ireland. The best people I ever met were right here in these houses in this city. Some of them are brand new and know me by legend. Some are my contemporaries on the job. And some are at the big house in the sky. But they're always in your heart and on your mind. Without further ado, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, I will be more than happy to take them.
Captain Hedrick had the most iconic transmission I've ever heard. County, after 4 days of rain, we successfully stomped out the only dry spot in Dauphin County.
Which was a mulch fire, of all things. A mulch fire under the FIA building.
Go bear with him, I'll end it off with you two sitting up there.
Come here and sit with me. Bad boy.
Yeah, such a terrible kid.
Little man that plays with fire. I am really glad you turned out the way you did.
I had good guidance.
Yeah, and if you ever drive a motorcycle that fast again, I'm gonna kick your ass.